Our speaker today is Bart Worden, who has been the clergy leader for the Community for Ethical Culture since 1998 and was the executive director of the American Ethical Union, the National Federation of Ethical Culture and Ethical Humanist Societies, before retiring from that role last November. Bart is, in addition, a social worker who has worked with programs that help people recover from psychiatric disabilities. His address today is titled, How False Beliefs About Others Fuel Cultural Conflict. Welcome to the podium, Bart.
Good morning, folks. Really good to see you out here this morning. And I have a multimedia present. Well, no, multimedia. I got slides, which is unusual for me, but I'll explain it once I get myself sharing. Let's see how false beliefs share there. Okay, and then start the slideshow. And then get my presenter view. I learned to do this morning. Oops. There we go. Okay. Yeah, here we go. How false beliefs about others fuel cultural conflict. And I'm happy to share these slides, by the way, if people would like them. So Norma, our president, sent me an article that she said was really interesting. And I have to admit, I found it so too. And the article was about a report done by More in Common. And this is a group that is looking to understand, on the one end, what is driving people apart, what is causing conflict and division, and more importantly, what can help people knit back together. In what way can we be acting so that people are able to behave civilly with each other and do important things? All right, so they did a year-long project. And this one, they got really concerned about the teaching of history question that was coming up and people complaining about the race. What is the actual title for it? Critical race theory. Okay, so people have heard that title many times, right? So they got wondering, what is this about? What is actually happening in terms of people's thoughts and beliefs about all of this? And so they interviewed thousands of people over the course of a year's time. All right, and so they, I'll share their executive summary and give you a spoiler alert. Now I'll tell you what their conclusions are up front. The report shows that Republicans and Democrats share a common ground about how to teach our national story, hold inaccurate ideas about what the other side believes about teaching U.S. history, right? In other words, the main thing is Republicans are wrong about their ideas of what Democrats believe and hold true, and Democrats are wrong about what Republicans believe and hold true. Right, so it's there's actually a lot more commonality in people's actual opinions than people expect to see. All right, these perception gaps fuel distrust and are exacerbated by conflict entrepreneurs. Those are the political and media actors who benefit from and actively stoke polarization. Now, we're not seeing that at all, I'm sure. I'm sure those are following the news this week just with our Congress. I think we'll see some rather interesting posts if you really want to look into that. This report also suggests ways leaders and institutions can disrupt those cycles of misunderstanding to engage in constructive dialogue, reducing polarization. Right, and we'll get to that at the end. And also note, after my talking part is done, there will be an opportunity for people to kind of split up into smaller groups and to do their own thinking about this. And that includes you folks online. You can get into your own breakout. That'd be fine. Let me get rid of that. All right. And next slide. All right, so here's the spoiler alert. They already said that here's the places where majority of Republicans and Democrats agree. Maybe you'll be surprised, maybe not. There's strong support among both parties for balanced approaches to teaching American history. I don't know what this Sturm und Drang has been about. Americans, regardless of party or race, hold favorable views towards civil rights leaders and founding fathers. substantive support across parties on how to teach about the intersection of race and American history. There's a lot of agreement about what should be taught and how it should be taught. Americans agree on major themes about the American story, including its founding, its failures, and progress. Right, but there's a perception gap, right? And so here's Republicans underestimate Democrats' commitment to celebrating American achievements and overall story of progress. So this a whole series of slides, by the way. And the important thing to look at here is the bar, right? And so on the red part is Republicans, the yellow is independents, and the blue is Democrats. And this part is Republicans underestimate Democrats' commitment to celebrating American achievements, right? So there's been this complaint that, with critical race theory, people just want to diss the United States and say that we're terrible and horrible, always have been, always will be, that sort of thing. However, that's not exactly the way that's not what Democrats typically hold true. All right, so here we go. All students should learn about how the Declaration of Independence and Constitution advance freedom and equality. Well, 92% of Democrats would agree with that statement, right? But the Republicans believe that 45% would believe with that. 45% of Democrats. All right. So in other words, this is looking at attitudes about Democrats, right? George Washington and Abraham Lincoln should be admired for their roles in American history. 87% of Democrats say, yeah, we should admire them. But 42% of Republicans say, no, Democrats don't admire our founding fathers. In learning about past injustices in American history and their impact on the present day, students should not be made to feel disempowered or hopeless. 87% of Democrats agreed with that statement. Despite the complaint that, what we're really looking to do is make children feel guilty and horrible, right? And again, so you see the pattern here. Oops, I didn't mean to go forward that far. Can we go back? And so let's look at it from the other side. Democrats underestimate Republicans' willingness to recognize failures in American history and the roles of minority groups in making America better. And here you see, Americans have a responsibility to learn from our past and fix our mistakes. 93% of Republicans agree with that statement. But only 35, from the Democrats, they believe only 35% of Democrats say, that's what they expect. That 35% of the Republicans would do that. Most Democrats feel that they would not agree with that statement. All right, is that clear? Okay, I'm getting a little bit of word salad generating here, and I want to make sure people can at least look at what the research did and make sense of it. All right. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks should be taught as examples of Americans who fought for equality. 93% of Republicans agree with that statement. Right. It's important that every American student learn about slavery, Jim Crow, and segregation. 83% of Republicans. Throughout our history, Americans have made incredible achievements and ugly errors. 91% of Republicans agree with that. America is better today because women, immigrants, and Black Americans have made progress towards equality. Now, this is lower, 77%, but that's still a supermajority of Republicans would agree with that statement. As with schools should teach both our shared national history and the history of specific groups such as Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans. You get the pattern here, right? There's a lot of things that have been kind of talked about, but when you get down to asking people what their opinions are, it can be quite different than you might expect. So there's strong support among both parties for balanced approaches to teaching American history. So you can see the bars here. So the Republicans are saying Americans have a responsibility to learn from our past and fix our mistakes. 93%. Throughout our history, Americans have made incredible achievements and ugly errors. 91%. America has made significant progress in reducing prejudice in recent decades. 83%. America is better today because, all right, so you see the percentages here. And on Democrat, and throughout our history, Americans have made incredible achievements and ugly errors, 95%. All students should learn about how the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution advanced freedom and equality, 92%. And George Washington and Abraham Lincoln should be admired. The Constitution should be preserved and respected, 80%. We don't need to be ashamed to be American. Still a supermajority, 71%. Again, the lower end of it, but still supermajority. Right? There's support for how to teach about the intersection of race and American history, right? So 93% of Republicans agree that Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks should be taught as examples. 83%, it's important that every American student learn about slavery. Schools should teach national history. On the Democrat end, in learning about past injustices in American history and their impact on the present day, students should not be made to feel disempowered or helpless, 87%. In learning about American history, students should not be made to see each other as personally responsible for the actions of earlier generations, 85%. In learning about American history, students should not be made to feel personally responsible for the actions. Oh, that's interesting. They had it back over again, the same question. That's weird. Okay, well,
To see each other and to
I
feel.
copied this, so I can't own the
No,
table
to
in
see
this
each
case.
other and to feel.
However, and this is kind of where it gets to be much edgier. Partisans hold deep animosity towards their party opponents, right? And this has been a growing level of animosity here. And so you can see here, so on the Republican side, their look at, this is Republicans' view of Democrats on the red side, 89%. Okay, devoted. Oh, you know what? Let me move over to this, and then I'll go back to that slide. So several years ago, the same group developed the hidden tribes way of looking at the political spectrum, because their sense was you don't just have Republicans and Democrats and independents. You have really a range of beliefs and opinions and engagement that probably has something to say about what people actually think and do. All right. So starting at the most progressive, they start with progressive activists. And progressive activists have strong ideological views, high levels of engagement with political issues, and the highest levels of education and socioeconomic status. They have an outsized role in political discourse, even though they comprise a small portion of the total population. I think it's 8%. They are highly sensitive to issues of fairness and equity in society, particularly with regards to race, gender, and other minority group identities. Progressive activists are heavily populating our colleges and universities, among other places. Next would be traditional liberals. So this is moving a little bit away from the progressive edge. Traditional liberals reflect the ideals of the baby boomer generation. Any baby boomers in the room here? Probably all of us, almost not all of us. Thank goodness. Okay. Now, they maintain idealistic attitudes about the potential for social justice in America. They're less ideological than progressive activists. They're also less critical of conservatives. They have strong humanitarian values, and around half say that religion is important to them. They are inclined to place more faith in American institutions. We'll get to that later too. And then we have passive liberals. Passive liberals are weakly engaged in social and political issues, but when pushed, they have a modern outlook and tend to have liberal views on social issues. They tend to feel isolated from their communities and the system at large. They are among the most fatalistic, believing that circumstances are largely outside their control. They are quite uninformed, consume little news media, and generally avoid political debates. We could have more of those folks. Anyway, politically disengaged. So kind of what in between the liberal and conservative spectrum are those who are just completely disengaged right? And for them, the politically disengaged most resemble passive liberals in having lower levels of income and education. They're more anxious about external threats and less open in their attitudes towards difference. They're practically invisible in local politics and community life.
Hmm.
They are the most pessimistic about the possibility of reconciling differences and are a difficult segment to reach and mobilize. So going more on the conservative end, and this is moving towards more conservative. Oh, hold on. With or back in the room. Moderates reflect the middle of the road of public opinion in America. They tend to be engaged in their communities, often volunteer, and are interested in current affairs. They tend to be socially conservative, and religion plays an important role in their lives. They dislike activism and what they see as extremism of both progressives and conservatives. They are worried about the state of America and feel that that American identity is slipping away. And then we have the traditional conservatives. Traditional conservatives value patriotism and America's Christian foundations. They feel those foundations are under threat from a liberal political culture. They have a clear sense of identity as American, Christian, and conservative, but they are not as strident in their beliefs as devoted conservatives. They are more likely than any other group to feel that their voice is represented in American politics, maybe until very recently. Devoted conservatives are the counterpoint to the progressive activists. They are one of the highest income earning groups and feel happier and more secure than most Americans. They are highly engaged in social and political life. They value patriotism and loyalty to the flag. They believe that American values are being eroded rapidly, and they see themselves as defenders of those issues.
Wow.
I want to go over those things because some of the slides that follow, like this one, for instance, you can see it has Republicans' views of Democrats is the dark red, and devoted conservatives' views of Democrats is the lighter red or pink. All right, and so you can see here for negative qualities, where Republicans' idea about Democrats is that 75% of them are brainwashed, or 75% say they're brainwashed. 89% of the voted conservatives would say that they are brainwashed. Meanwhile, while positive qualities, 8% of Republicans can see Democrats as reasonable, only 2% of the other. So you get the pattern, right? So going over to the Democrat side, or brainwashed, 88%. It's like the same thing, it's just flipped, all right?
Mhm.
Or pretty close to the same thing. The Democrats actually have more negativity, it looks like to me, in many respects, but also a little bit more positivity. So I guess maybe it balances out. Right. Americans also have low trust that public schools actually teach an honest account of history. And here you see some variation in terms of, so if you look around the bottom, it's a whole collection of things. So there's the US average, but then there's the hidden tribe are the yellow ones, right? So that spectrum of people, and they're labeled down below. And then they're generational is the purple, race is the pink, and political party is the gray. And you can see that traditional liberals really think that the highest of what's happening in the education system, and devoted conservatives think the least, right? The average is 41%, so it's not like there's a lot of trust in the first place, but it's remarkably different between the traditional liberal idea and the devoted conservatives idea. I mean, 9%, that's really getting down there. They're divided on the topic of US history. All right, so this is the same collection again, and you can see that for the devoted conservatives and progressive activists, there's there's a strong sense that we're highly divided. For the politically disengaged, they don't see the divide nearly so much, less than half. And others are more in the middle, though everyone is seeing divide except for the politically disengaged are seeing a majority of people would say there's a divide. That's certainly so. All right, so here's the proportions of the hidden tribe folks, right? So for progressive activists, 8%, traditional liberals, 11%, passive liberals, 15%, politically disengaged, 26%, moderates, 15%, traditional conservatives, 19%, and devoted conservatives, 6%. Now, what's really important about this table is where the energy is coming from is primarily from the progressive activists and the devoted conservatives, right? These are the groups that are really driving opinion and conversation in a big way. And let's see what's for this. We got that one already. All right, so this is magnitude and variation perception gas. So this compares 2019 with 2022. And this was really striking to me. So you see the political spectrum, or the hidden tribes spectrums down below. And you can see in 2019, there was, a perception gap, certainly, and it was still strongest then between progressive activists and devoted conservatives, but it's really increased a lot. And it's increased across the board, right? So even the politically disengaged, almost half of them have this gap in understanding in their opinion about Republicans or Democrats being wrong. It's basically what we're looking at here. But you can see that it's really high and unfortunately just about everybody. Okay, so the other thing is, though, this is really more focused on, it's the political end that's driving it more than, let's say, races, right? So if you look at the group's opinions by race, you can see that it's really centered much more in the middle. But, oops. So here the question is, lingering too much on past atrocities prevents us from moving forward. Progressive activists are saying, yeah, and progressive devoted conservatives are saying no. But people in the middle generally say, yes, this is something that we really need to be focusing on. Right, and here's the history of minority groups is treated as more important than the history of Americans in general. Devoted conservatives, more than half of them think that is true. For progressive activists, I think they disagree with that. So yeah, I'm trying to understand it now. Oh, okay. I'm going the wrong way. That's why. Okay. So on the vertical axis is the horizontal axis is the level of agreement, and the vertical axis is the percentage of those folks who hold that opinion. Okay. Sorry. Americans, regardless of party or race, hold favorable views towards civil rights leaders and founding fathers. They found most Americans, 71%, believe it's important to teach the history of racism in America. There's some variation across political parties. Only 52% of Republicans support this broad statement, and another 20% say they neither agree nor disagree. But when asked about teaching specific racial injustices in history, an overwhelming majority of Republicans were supportive. For example, most Republicans, 83%, agreed with teaching students about the history of slavery, Jim Crow, and segregation. Right, and so here's the balanced history question again. We saw that earlier. Americans agree on major themes about the American story, including founding failures and progress. And here, this one is looking at both the political and racial look at it. So you can see the lines, the yellow line is, so the lines are the questions, and then the main thing is you can see there's a lot more agreement than there is disagreement on this end. So notably, the Black community has a less favorable idea about the question, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln should be admired for their roles in American history. And the Republican community has less interest in schools should teach both our shared national history and the history of specific groups such as Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans. But there's still the great majority of people are agreeing with those statements. You don't need to be ashamed to be American. Got a range there. Okay, teaching history is supported by most Americans. Americans should be taught the history of those with different racial backgrounds. And deep division characterizes the country's current political landscape. So there's just a lot of agreement on this, though especially, again, the devoted conservatives and the progressive activists are, near the top of the hole here. Deep negativity and pessimism characterizes Americans' views of the state of the country today. Right, 61%. So the question is showing U.S. average. Select up to 4 and give the percent for each in terms of their level of importance. How you describe it. So there's a whole collection here, and people get to choose 4. Divided got strongly more than anything else, and chaotic is up there too, as well as intolerant, racist, rigged, weak, lazy. It's sad. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. The ones that are incredibly low, humble, polite, and honest. Tube. Yeah. Right. So again, partisans hold deep animosity towards their party opponents. Remember this one from earlier. Right? And so you feel brainwashed, hateful, racist, and arrogant on the downward side. And yes, it's okay. Low level of trust in institutions is the norm. All right. So we had a thing earlier about education, but it seems to be pretty much across the board, except for like the military, apparently. It says, along with polarization, the second issue fanning the flames of the history wars is the deep and widespread level of distrust in American society. Our previous research found that no institution outside of the military garners widespread trust from across the American population, be it the federal government, corporations, or the media. And the education sector is no exception. So I didn't mean to jump forward on there. But you can see these are incredibly low levels of trust. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, and that they did, I think, account for that. And I know that it's a great article, by the way, and I'm happy to send the link to it. So you get it right off the internet. And there were, oh, okay, and so one of the things that I noticed is they would have these vignettes, and so one of the vignettes was from a conservative person who was concerned about what they were teaching her kid in school. So she asked, and she was like, the kids said, they're not teaching me any of this stuff in school. What are you talking about? And so she was surprised by that and kind of heartened, but also confused. right? And so there is this sense that people's idea about the nation can be quite different from their idea about their own slice. But with the level of fear that's going on right now, I think that may in fact be exacerbating, right? Because people really want to hold on to what they think they've got and fear that it's going to be taken away, right? I think that seems to be driving a lot of school board conversations recently for sure. All right, getting down to the bottom here. Okay, fractured trust, low trust in public schools, divided on the topic U.S. history. All right, so let's get to the recommendations because I can see we're kind of rolling along here. All right. So they have, I think, 7 or 8 recommendations for how this can be addressed. So I'll just go over them briefly. Uh, do not accept debates about teaching history framed in extreme binaries. Right? I mean, it just said assume greater complexity in the beliefs of Americans. Dispel the illusion of imaginary enemies by revealing the multitude of ways that Americans actually agree and how we should teach history, right? So you may want to print out some of the tables here and to be able to show people, I guess, or something. Cultivate more shared spaces for people to sensibly discuss and question these topics. Maybe an ethical society, for instance, would be a nice place to have a conversation about some of these things. Community institutions should work together to create spaces that are intentionally designed to allow for more open and frank conversations and allow people to ask questions without fear of judgment. I know one of the things that has been talked about here fairly frequently is maybe joining up with Better Angels or some of the other groups that are doing these kind of cross political spectrum conversations. And I do think that would be a really helpful thing for us to pursue. I think it's Better Angels, right? Better Angels. So it comes. The name actually came out of one of Abraham Lincoln's addresses. Something angels of our nature, the better angels of our nature. Basically, appealing to people to look for what is better inside of themselves and to empower that, really, and to help that be what drives their behavior, right? That within everyone, there is some level of goodness that, if it sees the light of day, could really be helpful. And so Better Angels is dedicated to doing that, trying to find the positive civic possibilities for people conversing with each other, even around difficult topics. So if you do, they have a lot of online conversations, which you can join for sure. And what they'll do is they'll ask people to self-identify as Republican or Democrat I think it's Republican or Democrat, either way, or maybe it's conservative and liberal. And then speak from their own point of view about what's going on. And they get to talk without being interrupted. And then somebody else gets to kind of respond to what has been said. And then that person also gets to talk about their point of view. And the other person gets to respond to what they said. And other people can kind of join in terms of the conversation. And it's really quite something to see. And people that join these typically are folks who have first of all, they wouldn't join it if they didn't have some readiness to hear, right? Otherwise, why bother? And these are people that are pretty passionate about what they do hold dear, and so want to be in a position to kind of talk about it in a positive way. So I think it's definitely worthwhile. All right. So cultivate more shared spaces. 3, in communicating about how to teach history, use language that's concrete and accessible. Right? Use language and framings customized to the local context, as you were saying before. Given the highly decentralized nature of education in America, rather than adopting language terms or frames that are used in national debates and national media, leaders should put concepts into terms that have unique local salience. I don't know if people saw the Times, I don't know, it was a week ago or a couple of weeks ago, there was a look at what can I use as language about different groups? Did people see this? And so, is it Native Americans? Is it Indians? Is it indigenous peoples? Is it Black? Is it African American? And the one that was most intriguing to me was Latinx. Latinx is the least appreciated label. And so part of what happens is people often, I guess probably in academia, kind of come up with labels that they feel will be non-irritating, but ultimately don't really have that effect and don't get it accepted as ways to name ourselves. All right. All right. 4, media should reject the presumption of conflict in the conversation about teaching history and when reporting, to distinguish between areas of genuine disagreement and areas where Americans agree. Similarly, greater attention could be paid to the underlying issues of polarization and distrust that fuel the history wars. 5, organizations in the education space should build cross-cutting coalitions to push back against the highly toxic polarization of the history wars and set healthier norms for how communities address disagreements. 6, support and lead interventions to reduce perception gaps. Recent research has shown that correcting misperceptions is both possible and productive. And finally, challenge zero-sum thinking. Zero-sum thinking, winners and losers, right? Politicians, educators, media, and influencers in the fields of education and history should acknowledge the concerns about preferencing one's group's history over another's, but challenge any notions that this is a zero-sum consideration. Americans should do more to lift up ways of teaching history where all groups feel their stories are included and where such learning reinforces a shared narrative of American history. Communication should avoid activating a false binary and underscore how such learning better prepares us to build a stronger future together. Now, the thing is, and this is I think the last address on social media was kind of looking at this end of it too. Non-binary is all well and good, except that it's the people at the edges that are driving so much of the conversation and also driving opinion. And it's much easier to be heard if you are on an edge and if you're shouting, especially when if anyone challenges what you've been shouting about, a bunch of people will jump in and castigate whoever is making any other kind of more moderate kind of comments as being weak and ineffective or whatever else horrible. And these are really important things to be aware of, that in this time right now, it's much harder to make these kind of changes happen because of the level of juice that's going into the whole communication system that is driving us to the edges rather than helping us move toward a more productive center. Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. Yeah. I'm going to do one last wrap up thing, and then people are going to be in smaller groups and be able to kind of hash it out themselves. That's quite all right. But I think the point is well taken, which is the middle is boring. Quite frankly, this week I could use a bit more boredom, but that's what it is. So let me just give their kind of overview recommendation statement here, and then we'll close this, and James will bring us into some small group conversation. We do not suggest that Americans put aside their disagreements, if that were even possible. Rather, these recommendations are aimed at generating better conversations, dialogue, and debate, the kind of engagement that leads to progress and learning instead of to division and hostility. At the core of our recommendations are ways we can stop seeing imagined enemies and situate our disagreements in contexts that bind us together in how we want to tell our common story. And I'm going to let that ride there. James, if you could bring us into the next thing.
We'd like to take some time for thoughtful reflection and conversation in small groups about meaningful topics. We break into groups of 3 or 4. Once you are gathered, introduce yourselves and take turns responding to the question I'll be posing in a moment. Focus on listening to each other's sharing in 8 to 10-minute session. After that, we'll get back together, and those who would like to share will have an opportunity to do so. Today's topic has been how false beliefs about others fuel cultural conflict, and Bart's talk ended with recommendations for reducing the level of conflict in civil affairs. So today's request, talk about how you imagine addressing cultural conflicts that are likely to arise in your community. Where are there flashpoints? Where may there be some commonality in the aims of opposing parties? Let me repeat that once. Talk about how you imagine addressing cultural conflicts that are likely to arise in your community. Where are there flashpoints? Where may there be some commonality in the aims of opposing parties? We'll give you a 5-minute and a 2-minute notification. Okay, so why don't you just figure out your own 3 or 4 person groups and we'll get rolling. Okay, folks, welcome back. All right, so if you would please turn your attentions right here. And would someone like to share what you've been engaged in? Because I know I had a nice conversation. Any hands go up to share something? Kevin, you're with the mic. I know that in our group, a lot of us had people we knew or relatives or something where that estrangement factor is so problematical right now that it's frustrating to even know what to do. I was mentioning to Bart, we really should make sure that these sites are easy for us to then forward to people who we feel like would maybe get something out of this. Because I have a couple, 3 or 4 or 5 people in mind right now I'd like to send this to. At any rate, any hands to share? Oh, there we go, Ben.
So I was kind of critical of the presentation of the initial article. I talked a little bit about just I think the way the study was framed, how some of the how the questions were put up, how they kind of divided some of the things. I kind of feel like it might be overstating how much commonality there is. One example I used was Bart mentioned several times that there's kind of generally still universal agreement of teaching the importance of Martin Luther King, the skilled civil rights leader and orator. There's probably less popular support of teaching other elements of Martin Luther King, the socialist and person who worked with inner city gang leaders to build coalitions. Some of those elements, and same goes for founding fathers and other political activists that people are okay with teaching, like teaching what they know about it, and a lot of what people know about them is still kind of a sanitized or watered down version that we learned, that a lot of the other details don't get taught, and that's I think a lot of the disagreement about teaching curriculum and that's been popping up today is people want some of these other details to be taught, to teach some of these people as more 3-dimensional with their own personal failings and or their own personal controversies, and there's pushback from that. So people agree on a general idea, but maybe are very divided on some of these, very important details that.
Any other comments?
I have a personal observation that in my experience with one of my brothers who are much more right wing, I pick up that there is a kind of feeling like nostalgia and or a sense that the things we grew up with as kids are so much more comforting that, it was so much easier when cowboys and Indians were easily defined and all this sort of thing. And that I think they have my brothers I'm talking about have a kind of cultural dysphagia, some fancy word for just, they don't feel good, when they see everything that they were as kids not being good anymore. So I try to be in their shoes. I try to get where they're coming from. But of course, it's pretty strong, and it's not easy. It's not a simple thing to just overcome. Any other thoughts?
One thing that kind of bothers me sometimes is journalism and the media. Because the standard is you have to give both sides to the story. You always want to have both. It's like a professional standard. But sometimes they give voices to people with the most batshit crazy ideas.
Well, there is that.
That really don't belong in any serious discussion. But because of journalistic integrity, they have to let these people talk. And these people are the people on the far edges of the fringes, and they get their voice heard. And it's just sometimes it's annoying.
Well, I think that one of the points there was not to give in to that idea of assuming polarization as the basis of a discussion. And I think on TV, yeah, you see it all the time. It's like they just start with an assumption that everybody disagrees. Well, that's not a very good place to start from.
Okay, so I have to take issue with my dear friend, brother Kevin. I mean, dear friend. But when you label them as batshit crazy, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. They are not stupid. They are not, as Hillary Clinton chose to do, put them in a basket, separate them. They're human beings with sincere beliefs, and we have to accept that, at the same time accepting that our point of view might be questionable. Let's forget the batshit crazy. There aren't many of them in either camp. You're not getting the microphone back.
About my comment?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Teresa, and I just finished a degree in anthropology at SUNY Purchase. Now, you can imagine that white hair, my age, coming
you do this
from
part?
the
I'm not
baby
sure.
boomer generation, that kids would, and at first a few of them did, but I was sharing with my group that I was amazed at how well read, how open to new thoughts and ideas, how diverse the economic group was, and the racial group and the gender identity group was that I studied with. And they believe it's their responsibility to change things for the better. I'm not sure that my generation really took it seriously. they are driven to make changes. And I walked away from that degree and that study filled with hope about the younger generations coming up and the level of education they receive, not just in New York public schools, but there were quite a few Southerners like me in this program, and they were just so bright and engaged and well-read, far more than I am. And I've studied all my life. So I'm encouraged, and I do see that there is much more in common between generations, between genders, between political ideologies than anybody in the media would give, voice to. So except PBS.
I just want to suggest to Kevin that he vet his media choices, because if you pay attention to like BBC America, or the PBS NewsHour, you get reasonable discussions and, not a lot of fringe propaganda.
Sometimes I think it's.
Right. Question, anyone who's on the Zoom platform want to weigh in?
I have something
Yes,
to
Joanne?
say. What you were talking about in the bar graphs that you showed show such animosity and hatred amongst the different political viewpoints. And when you feel that strongly, when your emotions are that strong, you're not in a thinking frame of mind. And if these people could get rid of their strong emotions and intellectually try to hear the other people out and come to more of a common ground, we'd be much better off. But it's hard to get rid of those emotions.
Indeed. All right. James, if you want to just bring us home, I'm just going to I'm putting a link to the website from Diffusing History Wars into the chat for those who are there, and also I can send it around as well.
On either side of a potentially violent conflict, an opportunity exists to exercise compassion and diminish fear based on recognition of each other's humanity. Without such recognition, fear fueled by uninformed assumptions, cultural prejudice, desperation to meet basic human needs, or the panicked uncertainty of the moment explodes into violence. Thank you for sharing today with us here today. Thank you.